Welcome to Organic News with Cat Waters, revealing the truths behind the conspiracy. Every Tuesday from 6 to 8 Eastern.
Okay, thank you for tuning in this Tuesday, July the 7th, here on Organic News on Awake Radio. Thank you. I'm glad everybody can listen. We have a really good guest this evening, COSTAS Panayotakis, who's a sociology professor at New York Tech, CUNY in New York City, who was recently in Greece. And you have a book, Remaking, Scarcity, Capitalist Inefficiency to Economic Democracy. And your book is not only about Greece. Is that right, Kostas?
Yeah, that's correct. The book is a critique of neoclassical free market economics that claim that capitalist markets lead to an efficient use of scarce resources. And I show in my book, drawing, of course, from the recent capitalist crisis and from the situation in Greece to some extent, showing that this is not the case and that the way scarce resources are managed in capitalist society is not consistent with human well-being and the ecological integrity of the planet. So I argue that in order to have a better management of scarce resources, we need to move beyond capitalism towards a more democratic economic system, and I use the term economic democracy to describe it. And I sort of talk a little bit about examples or instances of economic democracy that exist in the world even today.
So let me just ask you simple, basic question. So do you believe that the people did the right thing by voting no?
Yes, I think it was the no vote was a great victory for democracy in Greece. People were under extreme psychological pressure to vote yes from the media that are controlled by the Greek oligarchs, who were peddling all kinds of nightmare scenarios. If the no prevailed, they faced lots of pressure in their workplaces, with their employers threatening that they would lose their jobs if no prevailed, and from European officials who said that a no vote would equal exit from the Eurozone. So it was clear that they were under extreme pressure, and yet they had the courage to stand up. And by the same token, of course, the situation in Greece, the economic situation, is very difficult. In response to the announcement of the referendum, and in an attempt to abort it, basically Greece's European creditors and the European Central Bank basically took actions that forced the closing of the Greek banks. So that has basically harmed the Greek economy a lot, and now both the Greek government is facing a difficult situation.
One question that I had would be, what would be so bad if Greece was not part of the Eurozone anymore?
Well, there is a lot of, a big debate about this in Greece, especially within the left in Greece. There is a sector of the left, including a sector of the leading Syriza party, the ruling Syriza party, who argue that Greece would be better off leaving the Eurozone because it would allow, it would give the government more control over economic policy, fiscal and monetary policy, and could allow Greece to do better. But this is not the majority view within the government, and it's not the majority view among Greek people either, who, according to all the polls, want to remain in the Eurozone. And there are different views as to what the effects of an exit from the Eurozone would be. Many of the people who oppose an exit from the Eurozone argue that the effects would be very, dramatic and negative for Greek people. There are others who, including some very distinguished economists like Paul Krugman, who argue that, Greece might be better off living in the Eurozone, and that most of the negative things that people associate to an exit from the Eurozone have already occurred. So there is a lot of debate about this, and of course the effects of an exit from the Eurozone would partly depend on how this exit takes place, what the specific conditions are.
Right. So do you believe that, like the nightmare scenarios, of course, that the people were being pressured, obviously is just like a scare tactic and not, because they want, they just like constantly just want to keep the Greek people under control, and in the debt, and keep the debt, perpetuating.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. By the same token, I don't want to minimize the difficulties of the current situation.
Yeah.
And Greek people, what makes Greek people's decision brave was that they themselves understand these difficulties to a large extent. After all, the referendum, as I mentioned, happened with the banks closed. So yes, I mean, scare tactics have been used to control Greek people for some time now, to encourage them to accept austerity. But of course, what has happened over the years is that whenever, each time there was an election and the left was, a contender for power, there would be the threat that, all these terrible things will happen if the left wins. And then guess what? When the right wing won, many of these negative things that they were supposed to prevent, would happen anyway. And I think this increased people's cynicism. It made people more cynical towards both the old political regime, the old, parties that were ruling Greece for the last 40 years. It made people cynical towards the media dominated by oligarchs. Yeah. So people developed an immunity towards these fear tactics. And this was reflected in the last two electoral results. The parliamentary elections that brought the current government in power in January, and the referendum result last Sunday, which was actually, a complete blowout. The magnitude of the no vote to the European proposal was much larger than anyone had expected.
And is it true that it's the older people that wanted to vote yes, and it was the younger ones that voted no?
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of different divides in Greek society that are reflected in electoral outcomes in recent years. One divide has to do with age, and this was true in the parliamentary elections back in January, with the old parties, the Socialist Party and the Conservative Party that had been ruling Greece for decades, being strongest among people over 65. And Syriza, the left-wing Syriza, completely dominating, younger people and middle-aged people. But there is also a class dimension to these votes, with most affluent neighborhoods, for example, in cities like Athens, voting for yes, and the working class neighborhoods, middle class neighborhoods being more likely to vote no by overwhelming margins.
So you also said that the no vote will not necessarily end the austerity, but it gives anti-austerity a chance to keep fighting.
Yes. Since when the current government, when the ruling party, the ruling Syriza party, was elected back in January, it was elected on an anti-austerity platform. But once it started negotiating with the Europeans, it faced a lot of pressure. It was confronted with a strategy of economic strangulation by the Europeans. So over the last few months, it made significant concessions to the Eurozone's austerity agenda. So, for example, they have agreed to run budget surpluses at a time when there is an unemployment rate of 25%.
Right.
So this is certainly a concession to the Eurozone's austerity agenda. And they will try to take a few steps in the direction of the European creditors to reach an agreement. But the European institutions and the IMF were not as flexible. They wanted to continue business as usual.
Right.
And this is what created the impasse in the negotiation and pushed Prime Minister Tsipras to call for a referendum.
Right. And it was the Prime Minister who was actually encouraging the people to vote no.
Right, exactly. Now, of course, and this is an important result for another reason, because in a certain way it binds the hands of the government, so to speak, because this resounding result will make it difficult for the government to achieve, to sort of reach an agreement with the Europeans that would be, as bad or worse than the one that was rejected in the referendum. Now, what the state of the negotiation is after the referendum is that the Greek government has applied for a new, basically, loan from the European creditors. And this loan will have to come with conditions. And some of these conditions may be austerity conditions. And the fact that the referendum result will make it harder for the government to achieve, austerity conditions that are worse than the ones that were rejected in the referendum. So that may complicate things unless the Europeans show more flexibility than in the past. It might make agreement harder. And of course, if the Greek government concludes an agreement with worse terms than the ones rejected in the referendum, of course, it might very well mean that anti-austerity movements that have been probably emboldened and strengthened as a result of the referendum might actually now turn against the new government, which was elected on an anti-austerity platform back in January, but is under a lot of pressure to basically violate its mandate.
Right. And you also said that the media, it doesn't focus on the suffering of the people.
Yeah, I mean, the media, especially the private TV networks owned by the Greek oligarchs who supported the austerity policy, they were, they were working hand in hand with the old political regime in Greece. Many of these, the owners of these TV networks were business owners, they have construction companies, they get contracts from the government. So and they have ties to the banking sector. So they supported these austerity policies. They supported the parties that were ruling Greece till recently. So there has been a double standard on their part. There has been a lot of suffering since the beginning of the austerity policies 5 years ago. But as long as the suffering of the Greek people was taking place on the behest of the old government, they were much less sensitive to any kind of suffering, like people standing in lines for to get fed in soup kitchens and so on and so forth. But once you had, the closing of the banks recently, they all of a sudden they became interested in the suffering of all people having to wait in lines to get their pensions from the bank. So they have been very sort of they have been very, very one-sided. Have been vehicles of propaganda, and in many cases they completely fabricated pictures. They used pictures from South Africa of all places, and presented them as if this was something that was happening in Greece. They're pretty, they were pretty shameless in this respect.
The media did that. Is that
yes? The TV net, the private TV networks controlled by the Greek oligarchs.
So it seems pretty quite clear that the people involved don't necessarily even want to see Greece recover. The European, the Eurozone and European officials and the European Commission.
Yeah, I think they have this strategy of austerity. Their priority has been to, protect the financial sector and to restructure European societies along neoliberal lines to basically erode any kind of welfare state that exists in European societies, to undercut labor protections and labor rights, and the people's suffering becomes a secondary consideration that does not figure, very large in their minds.
Exactly. I wanted to just quickly refer to if you're familiar with John Perkins, he wrote The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and he wrote a couple of articles about Greece. And he basically says, this is like the corporatocracy and what they do, and it's exactly, going, to plan. The Eurozone, an economic and current bloc or alliance, it has 19 members, but the Greek fiasco may leave them one short. The deadline for a 1.8 billion loan payment to the IMF meant that Greece closed their banks for 6 days after only allowing citizens to withdraw $66 a day for a period of time. Leaving the Eurozone cuts Greece off from its financial resources and forces her citizens to pay the price for her leaders' decisions. I mean, he basically thinks that Greece should not pay the debt. I mean, is the debt legitimate?
No, I mean, there are many problematic aspects about the Greek debt. I mean, the political elites in the old regime were notoriously corrupt. A big part of the debt was, the most fundamental cause, I think, for Greek deficits and the accumulation of debt had to do with the fact that wealthy Greeks did not pay their fair share of taxes. I mean, the most fundamental problem with Greek deficits was not so much too much spending on the part of Greek government, but not enough tax revenues to cover the spending. But beyond that, it's also true that there was a lot of corruption. There was a lot of money, much of the debt had to do with, needs with basically military procurement, basically buying arms from different transnational corporations, either American, French, German, and because the amounts of money involved were astronomical, there was a lot of corruption that took place. And in fact, one of the former defense ministers and the leading figure in the Socialist Party is actually in prison, has been convicted of corruption. So, and of course, the debt that has accumulated since the debt crisis, the money that Greece borrowed in order to keep servicing its debt, most of the money did not stay in Greece. It was it went back to the creditors, and the original bailout was not designed to serve the needs of Greek people. It was primarily designed to bail out German and French and European banks that were exposed to Greek debt. So there is certainly grounds for doubting the legitimacy of the Greek debt, and in fact, the Greek Parliament recently established a commission to inquire into the legitimacy of the Greek debt, and they basically confirmed this conclusion.
That it was or was not legitimate.
That it was not legitimate.
Right.
And it was not payable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the people don't deserve it. It is not their debt.
Yeah, and it's also not possible to pay, which is also recognized by all serious economists and recently even by the International Monetary Fund. Beyond its legitimacy, beyond the fact that this debt is not legitimate, it is not possible for Greece to pay its debt.
Right. So you mentioned Germany, and Angela, I just wanted to mention, what Angela Merkel said about it being a generous offer. It's like the negotiation.
Hello?
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Kostas? Oh.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, like you had said that it was a joke what she said about it being a generous offer, what they were offering, the renegotiations to Greece. It was like an insult.
Yeah. I mean, the austerity programs that have been imposed on Greece for the last 5 years have been devastating for the Greek economy and Greek society more generally. The economy has shrunk by 25%. This is the kind of economic failure that was last seen in the 30s in the US during the Great Depression. And unemployment has risen to 25%. For young people, it's like 50%. Most of the educated young Greeks have to leave the country in order to find a job. Poverty has skyrocketed. The middle class has been decimated. So there is a social catastrophe that has resulted from these policies. And even the IMF, which was involved in this program, has admitted the fallacy of the models it used to design this program. And yet, despite all these failures, they insist on continuing with the same recipe that is basically failing Greek people.
And also the European Commissioner Jean-Claude Juncker, who was blaming the Greek people, making them responsible, when you had mentioned that he was the one that was providing and keeping money in tax havens, and who actually is part of creating this debt for Greece.
Yeah, Juncker was the Prime Minister of Luxembourg for many years, and while Prime Minister of Luxembourg, it came to light that he basically turned Luxembourg into a tax haven that was basically thriving at the expense of its European neighbors. So all transnational corporations, used Luxembourg as a way of reducing their taxes and therefore draining other European countries from tax revenue. So it is kind of surreal and absurd and hypocritical for an individual like that to pretend like he's going to solve, or he's going to be part of the solution when it comes to the debt crisis, the Eurozone debt crisis. And it's like doubly hypocritical to have him like point the finger towards, governments that find themselves in trouble, partly as a result of the shenanigans of his own shenanigans as Prime Minister of Luxembourg. And, Luxembourg is not the only, tax haven. Some of the other countries that take a hard line on the debt crisis and they sort of support the austerity policies have also been complicit, like the Netherlands, for example.
Right. So what do you see that has to be done? Like, what should Greece do now?
Greeks have to keep fighting against austerity. It seems to me that what the Eurozone has proven itself to be is an arrangement that is simply not consistent with democracy. We saw that in the attempt to abort the Greek referendum, and in fact, European officials had aborted an attempt to have a referendum in Greece regarding a previous bailout agreement a few years back. And it's also undemocratic because they don't allow citizens to choose between different types of economic policy. They have very rigid rules regarding fiscal policy. The rules they have involve having governments always have a balanced budget. This is the kind of policy that in the United States would be favored by the far right of the Republican Party. In fact, when the far right of the Republican Party wanted to have a balanced budget amendment in the US, all serious economists were up in arms about it, and they said this is crazy. I mean, in times of economic crisis, of unemployment, the government has to spend to stimulate the economy. This is a basic lesson that we learned, back in the 30s, and of course, Keynes theorized that. So basically, what the Eurozone wants to do is to prevent this choice of different types of economic policy. Keynesian policy is basically, treated as if it is basically banned. And so there is no real democracy. Citizens cannot choose. They don't have different options when it comes to the economic policies that will affect their livelihoods, their ability to find jobs and feed their families. So in light of all this, I think it would be better, Greece would be better off to leave the Eurozone. But of course, the question is, my hope is that the current Syriza government is prepared for such an eventuality, because how this transition is managed will make a big difference. And I don't know that they're fully prepared for this because their line has consistently been that we want to stay in the Eurozone. So I don't know if they have a plan B, so to speak, about the possibility of, moving out, exiting the Eurozone.
Do you think they should exit the Eurozone?
That would be my thinking at this point. I mean, when before the election, I was, as I was saying, there is a debate in the Greek left. There was a debate as to whether Greece should exit the Eurozone, and I was agnostic when it came to that debate. I mean, the Syriza leadership was saying that, there was a side that said Greece will be better off by exiting the Eurozone because then the government has more tools to control economic policy, and, the devalued currency, a softer currency will make Greece more competitive, and so on and so forth. There was another side that said, no, the effects would be too catastrophic. So I was agnostic about this debate at the time. I think one of the good things about the election of Syriza was that it allowed us to test the Syriza leadership's proposition that it is possible to reverse austerity within the Eurozone. And it seems to me, after these last 5 months, it seems to me that the Syriza leadership was over-optimistic about the possibility of reversing austerity within the Eurozone. So in light of this, it seems to me that the priority should not be for Greece to remain in the Eurozone. The priority should be to reverse austerity, to try to reverse austerity and to protect democracy, which is basically fatally undercut as a result of the Eurozone rules. But at the same time, it is also true that Greek people, according to polls, a majority of Greek people do not want Greece to live in the Eurozone. So it is not clear that, the Greek government now has a mandate to exit the Eurozone. So it's a sort of difficult conundrum for them. It is a difficult decision that they will have to make in the next few days. So we will see what happens.
Do you believe that it's Greece's relationship and when they joined the Eurozone that is when all the problems started?
Well, no, I mean, I wouldn't say that, but the fact that the European, the economic integration, the problem with it was that it brought together different economies that were not equally strong. And when you have free trade and free movement of capital in an area that includes both economically strong countries like Germany and less strong countries like Greece, usually the main beneficiary will be the economically stronger country. So I think even though there were differences between economically strong countries in Europe and less strong countries before the establishment of the Eurozone has basically increased this gap, and as a result has made the Eurozone less stable.
Right. Most European countries are part of the Eurozone. Switzerland is not part of the Eurozone. What is the benefit of being part of the Eurozone?
Well, I mean, a country that is not part of the Eurozone, basically, the government has more control over economic policy, like financial policy, like fiscal policy and monetary policy. Therefore, the policy can be better tailored to the specific needs of the country. So one of the problems, for example, with Eurozone is that it includes many different countries with different economies. So you may have a situation where in one country there may be lots of economic growth, and it may be in an upward phase of the economic cycle, and another country may be in a period of downturn. So in this, when you have in the Eurozone, this creates a problem because the kind of monetary policy that would be possible, that would be good for the first country, would not be good for the second country, right? When a country that is in the midst of a downturn and has unemployment wants a more expansive, more looser, a looser monetary policy to stimulate the economy, while a country that is growing very fast, needs the opposite monetary policy, right? So this is the problem with the Eurozone. It includes economies that are very different from each other, and therefore it makes it harder to sort of choose to choose a policy that works for all of them. So staying outside the Eurozone has the advantage of providing government with more control over economic policy, the ability to choose the kind of policy that is most appropriate at any given point in time. It also reduces the pressure this government feels to restructure its economy according to the free market neoliberal model. I mean, this has been one of the main effects of the European project and the Eurozone in recent years, to basically change the European social model that involved a strong welfare state and government intervention in ways that basically protected people's labor rights and made the economy work more effectively. This model is basically undercut by the Eurozone, and that's why some of the Scandinavian countries that have a tradition of strong welfare states have either stayed outside the European Union altogether or are part of the European Union, but they haven't joined the Eurozone. So Sweden is part of the European Union but has not joined the Eurozone. Norway is not even part of the European Union because they realized that their strong welfare states there would be a lot of pressure to, basically, there would be a lot of pressure to undercut, to erode those policies that people benefit from and value.
So just a couple of more questions about Germany. That Germany is basically condemning Greece for not being able to pay their debt but Germany had a debt relief happen to them back in 1953. I am not sure of the exact year, but they were given debt relief that they're not willing to do for Greece.
Well, apparently Greece is less deserving of debt relief because it hasn't helped to cause two world wars, and it never established death camps that killed millions of people. It's kind of a sort of an ironic, cynical kind of response, but I think it represents the fact that Germany is getting into a new phase. I mean, for a long time after the World War II, Germans were sombered by the weight of the past, and now, frankly, they are less shy about becoming an imperial power once again. Yeah. And this time around, the imperialism is not of the military sort, but the economic one.
Right. Yeah, economic strangulation. And what do you think of the finance minister Yanis Varoufakis resigning?
Yeah, I think he's a brilliant economist. First of all, he was a trenchant critic of the austerity policy that was imposed on Greece and that has been imposed throughout the periphery of Europe. And he basically, I think, he antagonized many of his the finance ministers in Eurozone countries, and for that, and he became unpopular because he insisted on changing the strategy that was not working. That he didn't want to reach any kind of agreement with the European creditors. He wanted a viable agreement, and he was, very emphatic about the need of debt relief for Greece. So I think for all those reasons, he became very unpopular, and I think the Greek Prime Minister felt that the negotiation might become a little easier if there was a new face who came in, who that had not antagonized other finance ministers, and at the same time, it has to be said that this issue is not an issue of personalities. It's an issue of a difference in economic policy. And of course, this economic difference will not disappear just because there is a new finance minister.
Did Yanis, the finance minister, and the prime minister, were they on the same side, basically, keeping in touch, relating to one another, and as far as like what should be done when the choice, to vote yes or no?
Yeah, I wouldn't overstate the difference between them. There's some reports that, Varoufakis was a little more
for someone want to know more about
willing.
Then stop Googling.
Oops.
Millions of people have relied on binverified.com for in-depth background checks.
There's,
what are you waiting for? Start searching binverified.com today.
Yeah, I have no idea what that is.
hello?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Oh. Costas?
Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, finish.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, there looks this, I don't know what, I have no idea what that was.
Yeah, so there are some reports that suggested that Varoufakis was willing to entertain a rupture with the creditors at an early point in time, and that, that Tsipras was a little more conciliatory towards creditors and more pragmatic, or more willing to reach an agreement that was not exactly what Syriza had originally hoped for. But again, I wouldn't necessarily overstate the difference, especially since, Greece, since the Syriza government made lots of concessions to what creditors wanted, even while Varoufakis was the finance minister.
Right. So do you see this trend continuing in other countries, Italy perhaps?
And that this trend being what? The rise of anti-austerity parties?
Right. And
well, I think this is one of the big questions that is in the minds of the European creditors. This is one of the threats they want to avoid. I think one of the reasons they're taking such a hard line with the Greek government is they want to send a message to people around Europe that any attempt to silence the austerity orthodoxy will be squashed, and that any people who dare to vote for a government that does not accept the need for neoliberal austerity, will regret it. So I think they're setting up Greece and Syriza. They want to set up Greece and Syriza as an example, so as to threaten other countries and their people not to fight against austerity. And this is, for example, the case with Spain, where an anti-austerity party of the left that is similar to Syriza in many ways has recently become a contender for power. That's Podemos. And there is an election in Spain, and I'm sure that one of the considerations in the minds of European elites when they deal with Syriza is to prevent a political domino effect, and they want to prevent it by basically squashing Syriza and showing that there is no other way, there is no alternative to neoliberal austerity.
Right. So, Kostas, I want to thank you so much, COSTAS Panayotakis, for being on Organic News here on Awake Radio. And, I really hope, I see Greece coming out of this, and, I'm hoping that it actually creates, rising up, globally against the banks, the IMF, the World Bank, that, want to just keep doing what they're doing, not only to Greece, but to, to country after country.
Well, it was my pleasure. Greeks certainly need our support and solidarity. There have been solidarity movements in Europe and even in the US. And Greeks need all the support they can get at this difficult time. And people around the world are looking at them because they know that what is at stake in Greece is similar to what is at stake in other countries as well, because this attempt to make this capitalist crisis be paid by ordinary people is certainly not unique to Greece. We see similar dynamics in the US and elsewhere.
Right. And it's not even capitalism, really. It's not capitalism. It's not, it's not really based in any kind of reality. They deliberately want to create, it's actually the opposite of economics. They create mathematically impossible situations rather than economics, which is based on, reality and mathematics that actually works.
Well, I think what is possible and what is not possible is not purely a matter of mathematics or economics. It's also partly a matter of politics. It's partly a matter of how much people are willing to take. Even the most extreme policy that completely destroys the economy and people's lives will survive if people do not rise up. It's if people are very well organized and they're militant and they fight back, even policies that would create, less severe problems would not survive. So, what is possible and what is not.
Kostas? Kostas, can you hear me?
And how ready people are to fight against injustice.
Okay, I lost a few seconds of what you said there, but I did hear you say, right, it's all about, how much the people want to stand up and fight against their oppression and their illegitimate debt.
Yeah, so for example, in Greece, the results of these policies have been destructive and have been devastating. But if people do not continue to fight against them, it is possible that at some point in the future, sort of capitalism will survive, and at some point when people have become, when salaries and labor rights have reached a low enough point, businesses may become more profitable. And because they have become more profitable, they may invest more, and the economy may pick up. The fact that millions of people's lives will have been destroyed in the process, will be the basis on which capitalism recovers. So my point is that when this happens, there are two scenarios. There is the scenario that people are organized and they fight back and they're successful and they prevent, the destruction of their lives for the sake of profit, in which case these policies do not survive. But then there is also the scenario that if people do not react, then, eventually capitalist profit and capitalist growth will resume at the expense of people's lives.
Right. I mean, we didn't even get to talk about the TPP, which is actually the next guest is going to speak about that, which, I mean, I almost kind of feel like this situation with Greece is an example of, it's just profit, and it's going to get worse now with the TPP. And that's the discussion in the next hour with Patrick Woodall from Food and Water Watch.
Yeah, that's an important discussion. I mean, the whole free trade agenda is part of this neoliberal model that is applied around the world and that is growing, leading to growing economic inequalities, and has contributed to the recent, global capitalist crisis.
Exactly. I mean, like everyone around the world needs to stand against this. I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, it doesn't get any more ridiculous.
Yeah.
But then anyway, again, thank you, COSTAS Panayotakis, and your book, Remaking Scarcity from Capitalist Ineffectiveness to Economic Democracy.
Thank you.